Nikolas here. So my portion of this Turing project, I'm going to be talking about Turing's notion of machines can think and how different people objected to this notion and how Turing actually responded to these objections. So the three that I found most interesting and that I'll be talking about in this presentation are the theological objection, the mathematical objection, and lastly, Lady Lovelace's objection. Let's get started with the theological objection. So, this objection pulls from the religious ideology that Turing is wrong to think that machines can think because the capacity to think is a gift from God, reserved for humans with souls. The center of this point is that we are all made in the image of God, so machines, which were created by us and materials that we found on this earth, cannot have been designed in this same image. So, in essence, if the capacity to think is linked to the divine gift of a soul, then it follows that machines cannot think in a meaningful manner as we do. So, here I included a little passage from the encyclopedia essay on the Turing test where the author states that where a soul is suitably combined with a body, this is always the work of the divine creator of the universe. It is entirely up to God whether or not a particular kind of body is imbued with a thinking soul. So, what was Turing's response to the notion that machines can't think because of this theological objection? Well, he argued that if it's true that God is all powerful, then why can't he imbue machines with this thinking soul? If we limit his power to humans alone, then we essentially minimize his omnipotent nature. Those who deny a machine's capacity to think on this theological objection actually do so by ignorantly refusing to acknowledge the fact that if God is all knowing and all powerful, then why would it follow that he couldn't give a capacity to think to whatever object or organism he saw fit? While characters like Wally or CD3 that we've explored thus far in class have no reason to be able to think at all in the context of this objection, we see both robots evoking emotions not only in the human characters around them, but also in the viewers of their stories. These androids were clearly able to think independently and display soul-like qualities, with Wally risking it all to save Eve, or Julia Elliott's CD3 taking matters into its own hands and downloading knowledge into itself. Now onto an objection that is a bit more complicated. The mathematical objection to Turing's belief that machines can think is rooted in the Lucas-Penrose constraint, which boils down to the idea that there are some questions that are unanswerable to machines, yet can be answered by humans, thus separating our thinking capacities. This means that there will always be truths that machines cannot reach, so they can't truly think as humans do. So this is explained in the encyclopedia essay by this passage where there are certain things that any digital computer cannot do. If it is rigged up to give answers to questions as in the imitation game, there will be some questions to which it will either give a wrong answer or fail to give an answer at all, however much time is allowed for a reply. So, Turing's response to this objection was that it is possible that humans also have their own version of the Lucas-Penrose constraint within them, as we are not infallible and often also come to wrong conclusions. To disqualify a machine's capacity to think simply because they are not always right is unrealistic, because if this were the case, then we humans would also be considered incapable of thinking. What is lost here in this objection, riddled with numbers and logic, is that the mere fact of containing this constraint within oneself doesn't necessarily mean they do not have the capacity to think independently. Take CD3's character again, where despite the fact that it had to have information downloaded into it by Dr. Dingle to obtain knowledge, a constraint, it was still able to have independent thoughts, whether it be secretly researching Minerva or escaping the lab into the real world to meet her. That kind of behavior, while imperfect, doesn't disqualify CD3 from being able to think, but rather reinforces the opposite. So the last objection we're going to talk about today is actually one of the most popular, and it is Lady Lovelace's objection. So in her memoir on Babbage's analytical engine, she writes that the analytical engine has no pretensions to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. So what does this mean? Well, this suggests that machines cannot truly think because they are incapable of bringing about new ideas other than what humans have instilled in their circuitry. In this context, it would seem that robots cannot do anything but execute commands given to them by a human, lacking a capacity to work beyond their codes. This touches on the notion that humans have intrinsic originality and creativity rather than being slaves to forces out of their control. If machines can only do what we tell them to do, then how can we logically say that they can think independently at all? Well, Turing would argue that there are instances where machines do go beyond their code and surprise us. While they follow certain regulations, their numerous operations and unpredictability means that they can yield results outside of our expectations. Also, he argues that humans are only as original as their biology and genetics allows them to be. This brings up the philosophical question of whether we really do anything that is new ourselves. Sure, we have our own personalities and interactions, but how can we say for sure that this is new to the world? If we assess the capacity to think by being able to bring new things into this world, then what happens if we don't do so ourselves? Does that mean we are not capable of independent thought? That's the question I want to leave with you today.